necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have you along as well. You know, KFAI is such a jewel, such a precious and important asset for our community. We are so happy to be able to continue the conversation with Al McFarlane on KFAI. It's the best thing in the world to follow Amy Goodman. She does innovative, groundbreaking and important work every time she's on, and we're pleased to be adjacent to her. Well, what I want to do today is continue, and I want to begin by just reminding people that our friends over at the Minnesota Department of Health are hosting a COVID vaccine event at Amherst Wilder, which is at 451 Lexington Parkway North in St. Paul. That's going to be this Saturday, July 15th from 10 to 4 o'clock. It's a free event open to the public. And like us, the Department of Health encourages everyone to get vaccinated against COVID and make sure you're protected. And one of the ways you can do that is to show up for the vaccination clinic at Wilder. That's again this Saturday, July 15th from 10 to 4. Wilder is at 451 Lexington Parkway North in St. Paul. I also want to begin by inviting and reminding particularly our listeners here on KFAI to support this program by checking out the live stream as well as the radio show. We're streaming this program every day to YouTube at the Black Press USA platform, also to the YouTube Inside News platform. We also stream it to 3 Facebook pages, Al McFarlane, Black Press USA, and Inside News. We stream to LinkedIn and to Twitter as well. We're reaching you in as many ways as we can. Of course, a powerful method is reaching you here on the radio at KFAI. But what I want you to do, when you get a minute, go over to YouTube, Inside News MN, that's Insight's YouTube platform, and simply subscribe, like, and share. We want to get to 1,000 subscribers. Your subscribing is one of the ways that'll get us there. Do that when you get a minute. Let people know that you check us out. And if you're online anywhere, send a note. Let us know where you are. Shout out your own name, and we'll try to share people information about you as well. So listen, today's program, an important one, an exciting one. I'm pleased to have as a principal guest DaMaris Marjett Jones. She's Miss Black Minnesota Talented Teen 2023, and she's on a mission to compete in the national Miss Black USA Talented Teen pageant. Now she's here with her mom and dad. I'm so glad that they're here. And I asked them to come on because what they represent, what they do as parents, supporting their daughter, I think is significant, important, appropriate, and praiseworthy. So first of all, DaMaris, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. And hi, Angel Jones. Hi, DeMar Jones. Proud mom, proud dad. I wanted to start by just having the two of you talk about what this means to you. Then I'll ask DaMaris to talk about what she is passionate about in developing leadership and service skills. DaMaris, start with you, brother.
Well, first of all, it's amazing. And it's pronounced DaMaris, by the way.
Thank you.
No problem. It's amazing to see what she's doing. Even for me, her father, it's inspiring to see how I see little kids come up to her and be so amazed to meet her. And when she talks about her platform and what she wants to do, and help be a voice for people, and not just be that voice, but let people know that they can talk to their friends and family members. And when you can't talk to an adult, that it's okay. Get to that person, find an outlet to find a positive way to do that. So I'm so impressed by what she does, and it makes me feel incredible as a father.
And Mom, Angel, jump in here. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? How proud are you?
I am truly proud. I'm so overwhelmed with words right now. My daughter's absolutely beautiful. She loves to inspire and be through the creativity through makeup, and she does a wonderful job on it. And she can actually inspire other teens, to go ahead and be their self. So she has truly inspired us all, not only the teenagers, but us adults and parents as well.
Well, I want this to be a family conversation. It's not a script here. I want to introduce, tell me if I'm saying it right, DaMaris.
Yes, DaMaris.
Correct. I'll introduce DaMaris. And DaMaris, have you talk about who you are and what your vision is and what's motivating you to be the human being you're shaping, you're developing into. If I ask you that difficult question, DaMaris, what's your answer? Who are you, DaMaris Jones?
I am the first Miss Juneteenth of Minnesota.
All right.
And I am the current Miss Black Minnesota Talented Teen of this year. And basically what motivates me in all of this, when I first got word of wanting to become Miss Juneteenth, I was excited because I have always wanted to help people, and because I know that there are young girls, young boys who are struggling with like talking to people and trying to figure out what they want to do in life. And I was excited when I got word about becoming Miss Juneteenth because it meant that I finally get to have my voice be out there and get to actually help those young girls and boys, maybe with any stress that they're going through, or maybe if they just don't feel comfortable talking with someone, then they can they don't have to physically talk to me if they don't want to, but because I make like YouTube videos and stuff like that, maybe they could get comfortable and just like, I don't know, just have more that they want to talk about and have more that they want to do and not just give up on it, You're muted.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was looking at one of your bios. It's so impressive. One of the things you say is that your vision includes inspiring other girls and teens and young adults like yourself to speak up and to let them know that their voices need to be heard when it comes to emotional issues like stress, depression, self-esteem. How do you gain that kind of empathy at a young age? How old are you, DaMaris?
I'm 17, turning
And
18 in 2 months.
You're a junior, going to be a senior next year. Is that it?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, awesome. And so, that just reveals a degree of maturity and sophistication. How do you come by that? And I'm sure it's going to be your mom and dad, but what are your words?
Basically how I overcome stuff like stress and anxiety and depression and stuff like that, because I know that was a big thing for a lot of young girls and young boys, especially when COVID hit and all that stuff. And we all had to shut down and we had to basically be by ourselves. We couldn't be with other people. And I think how I got through that was me learning how to do makeup and stuff like that, because for me personally, I got to show like my different creativity, like with all the different colors and all the learning the different steps and all that. So that would be a big thing for me. It definitely was something to occupy my time because I was definitely very bored. It was either makeup or playing like fun games with my family or like talking on the phone with friends sometimes. But makeup was definitely a big part of that because I got to show my creativity, show my growth over the years in makeup. And yeah.
What are your dreams for yourself? What are the things you've decided you want to do career-wise in the future? I know that may change, but what are your thoughts at the moment?
Right now, I definitely want to be in entertainment business or like potentially a singer. I don't know yet, but either somewhere around there or doing stuff that's like creative, like interior design and stuff like that, because I get to show creativity in the colors of the rooms and all of the different things that come about in decorating.
Let me ask Mom and Dad, what do you see as the signature strengths of your daughter, DaMaris? And you've been watching her more than anybody else her entire life. What impresses you, Mom, Angel, about your daughter, DaMaris?
My daughter has a huge personality. Her personality is through the rooftop. Her growth with that, with, you know, just her, it's like a firecracker. I mean, she cracks jokes and she likes to smile and have people, and just literally have other people smile and laugh and just let them know to be their self. So her personality is absolutely through the roof. And I'm very happy of actually how that is and how it makes her grow with her her singing and her education. So that is a big part of it.
DeMarc, your thoughts?
When I think about the things about this young lady, her strength in who she is, she's not afraid to let you know she's there and that she wants to be heard. Her passion to give back, her belief and trust in God, the way she shows up as an individual and not afraid of other people is so incredible. That's the thing that impresses me so much about her. She has a never give up attitude and she has a go getter personality. So, and it shines so much when you get around her. And I know it's her father, so everyone's like, "Oh, you're her dad, you're going to say that." But I'm telling you, when you get around her, you just feel. She makes you feel good, and I think it's incredible.
Well, I just put a note in the side chat here. I'm going to put you on the spot, DaMaris. You mentioned singing, and your dad talked about your voice. You ever do a cappella? Would you do something? Show us what you got. What if I? This is something that I do with my hip hop artists all the time. Give me some poems, or give me some lines, or some rhymes. You got anything?
Give him a snippet of your stand, baby. Give him a little snippet of your stand.
Oh God. Okay.
Well, and I'm really being unfair putting you on the spot like this. So, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm going to sing the first verse of "Take Me to the King" by Tamala Man.
Awesome.
Pretty sure everyone's heard of it. So, yeah. Okay. Truth is, I'm tired. Options are few. I'm trying to pray, but where are you? I'm all churched out, hurt and abused. I can't fake what's left to do. Take me to the King. I don't have much to bring. My heart is torn in pieces. It's my offering. Lay me at the throne and leave me there alone to gaze upon your glory and sing to you this song. Please take me to the King.
Amazing, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. That's a lot of pressure. Listen, you handled it. And I'm sure you handle pressure like that all the time. And that's why you're going to win and continue to win. Thank you so very much. Well, one of the reasons I wanted you here was to have you invite our listeners, our viewers to support you. It costs a lot to mount the campaign that you're mounting and to move your team, getting you to be in competition. And I'd like for you to tell people maybe the email address or the Facebook, how they can connect with you to support you and support your bid for being the victor in the National Black Teen Contest. How can they reach you and support you?
So all of my social media accounts, they're all Miss Black Minnesota Talented Teen 2023. And that's for Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And then for my Cash App, it's DaMaris Jones 05 if you guys would like to donate to help me get to Washington, D.C. and to actually become Miss Black USA Talented Teen. And if I actually do win, I will be getting a 4-year full ride scholarship to any college that I want to go to. And I would just really love if everyone would help out and help me get there. And I'm trying to put Minnesota on the map, okay? I'm trying to help it. I'm trying to help us.
And you've got a GoFundMe as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, people know how to connect with you. Listen, thank you so much. Good luck. Thank you, Angel Jones. Thank you, DeMarc Jones. And thank you, especially DaMaris Jones. Good luck in your work and in your life, I think, and know that you will be effective and successful in achieving your goals. And as you said, putting Minnesota on the map. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys.
Yes,
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Glad to continue the program today. And I want to bring in my colleague to talk about this interview we just did, but more as well. My colleague, Dr. Irma McLaurin, is joining me. Irma, good afternoon. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Good. So let's talk a second about this idea of the Miss Black Teen pageant and contest. How important is it that we find ways to celebrate ourselves, our idea of what beauty is, our idea of what service is, and how important it is to see mom and dad there with their daughter in this arena of support? What are your thoughts, your feelings from the interview we just did?
Oh, I think it's fantastic to see this. It's fantastic to see parents celebrating their children, and it's wonderful to see such, as Lorraine Hansberry stated it, young, gifted, and Black talent that is being recognized not only locally but nationally, and a young woman who has as one of her goals to inspire other young people to be themselves, but also to showcase their talents. So I think it's remarkable. And this is at a moment when, there is kind of a sense in this country that Black parents don't care, that Black parents don't pay attention to their children. There are all these stereotypes out here. And so I think the more that you tell this kind of story, and narrative and show the authenticity of Black families and Black support and Black youth and talent, it will begin to hopefully change some of the, stereotypes that unfortunately are rampant in our culture.
Mm-hmm. And it's necessary, I think, for us to be the steward of our identity, our culture, and for the future that we think we can create, even amid the negativity that surrounds us in the social order. That's the fight that goes on. How do we change it? Well, listen, you're going to be hosting for me tomorrow, I think, right? No, Thursday. What's going to be your show? What are you talking about on Thursday?
Well, what I want to do is pay homage. I'm writing a piece that I'll be sending you shortly to James Haskins. James Haskins was my colleague at the University of Florida. He was one of 3 Black full professors at the time I was there in 1995 to 2004. And he was the children's literature department. What most people don't know is that James Haskins wrote over 145 books about Black people, primarily. I think he did one on Shirley Temple, but most of his books were Black books. And the first one he published in the late 1960s was called Diary of a Harlem School Teacher. And what he did was to publish the diary that he had kept. It was one of those PS when they stopped giving schools names and named them public school, PS this and that. And he kept track of the kinds of comments that the teachers who were teaching these young Black kids were making about them. And in a sense was saying, you know, it's because they don't see these children as their own. They don't see these children as connected to their life and their culture, that they treat them in this inhumane way. And what he was basically documenting was something that most people don't know. Today, 84% of all public school and public charter school teachers are white. Over 50%, if not more, of all children in public schools and public charter schools are children of color. At the time that Jim was writing his book, the number was up in the 90s. And so what people don't understand was that when Brown versus Board of Education integrated students, it did not integrate Black teachers. In fact, it decimated the Black teacher cadre that we had. The governor of Kansas fired en masse all Black teachers who were working in public schools and across the country. So this dearth of Black teachers that we talk about now as a crisis was not accidental. It is the development of a construction in which it was deliberate to put Black kids, and remember, Black kids were bused to white schools. White kids were not bused to Black schools. But it also was to erase the Black leadership, and you know, that they would have been able to see, to have a teacher. And I'm one of those, you know, I am a segregation baby. I was born in 1952. So I grew up under segregated schools. And I had opportunities, particularly in middle school, when the regular public school was overcrowded, the middle school, they opened up an elementary school. And in that school, for the first time, there were only 2 white people in the entire school. That was Mr. Wojnicki, the science teacher, who actually used to come into the projects and help me with my science project. And the secretary for the principal, Mr. Spain, who was a Black man. You know, my homeroom teacher, Mrs. Gray, and they stand out in my memory because they told us that we were the best and the brightest. Mr. Merriweather, who was the music teacher, used to set my poems to music. We actually did a play called Spring Frolics, you know, in which we toured some of the other middle schools. But they gave us a sense of ourselves and told us that we could be anything we wanted to be. And that sense of support and that sense of people believing in your talent has really guided the rest of my life. I think without that experience, many of the things that I encountered by being the first, as this young woman may become, would have hurt me, would have broken me, would have at least deterred me. But the sense of self that they gave me, that I could be brilliant and talented and that I could do anything, even if I encountered barriers, has really stayed with me all of my life, I would say. It was a magical moment to be in this place. And my homeroom teacher was very interesting because phenotypically she looked white. You know, she could pass. And she made a point of telling us that she was a Black woman. And, you know, so we celebrated Blackness, and we have to keep doing. We're now in a moment of erasure. I just saw about the reparations of the people in the Tulsa Holocaust trying to get reparations. I think the oldest living survivor is 109 years old. And a court just ruled against her suit. And not only did that, they ruled with prejudice, which meant that she can never, ever appeal. You know, so there is a deliberate attempt of what I call the reclamation of whiteness. White people want to regain that sort of sense of superiority, and they will use everything in their powers, legislation, laws, whatever it is, to sort of reinstate themselves as the center of this American universe, and if not the world.
And that's really no different from what happened after Reconstruction.
Absolutely.
Kind of visiting the same process again, where those who feel like they were or at risk of being uh, dispossessed of their privilege, of their advantage.
But what they feel was their entitlement by simply being born white.
Mhm.
Yes. And in addition to eliminating the possibility for this woman to file suit, they also have made it illegal in Kansas to teach, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to teach about the Tulsa massacre. It was a Holocaust,
Mhm.
you know, and the only reason we know about it is that the Red Cross took photographs that are now in the Library of Congress showing the decimation. You know, there's another Holocaust or pogrom, as someone called it, that occurred in East St. Louis before Tulsa. You know, we have these moments in which every time there are indications or examples of Blacks rising and achieving in ways that no one thought possible, there is white supremacy in the form of people, laws, institutions that rise up to erase that as if it never happened. And, you know, I've said this before, you know, I've written this. We are the bodies of the evidence. You cannot erase us. And this woman who is the Tulsa survivor, you know, has now written a book saying she was terrified to tell her story, but she basically has written a book that says, you know, do not let them, you know, let my story be heard, you know, and that's what we have to keep doing.
Let's pivot and talk about reparations. We've got a story for our hot topic today on proposed reparations for Black Californians. And the question is, what about Indigenous people? You know, what's your sense of that discussion in California? The article that we're showing here is one that is in the Los Angeles Times. It's a piece from today by Thomas Beeson. And this particular piece focuses on, you know, what about Indigenous people? Let me read a couple of paragraphs of it. It says, for Angela Mooney Darcy and other Indigenous Californians, a spirit of racial trauma hangs over some of the richest and most storied stretches of the Golden State. California, like all of the Americas, is built on a stolen world, Darcy says. The glamorous ocean view houses of Malibu sit where the Chumash fished, hunted, and played and performed rituals. Every home run at Dodger Stadium soars over the ancestral grounds of the people of the Willow Houses, as the Tongva were known. So the luxury subdivision and country clubs and surfing havens of Orange County occupy the heartland of the Acheman people, including Darcy's ancestors who believe their creator placed them at the edge of the Pacific at the dawn of time. So, Irma, how do we move forward this discussion on reparations, and how do we encompass all of the dimensions of reconciliation, of reclamation? And does this put us in a competition? It shouldn't, but does it? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it can only be a competition if we choose to take it in that way. In any kind of an event, it is how we choose to respond. And I think we cannot, with any kind of ethical justice, sense of moral right, not support the Indigenous rights to reclaim their land. Because many of the Indigenous people, not all, some were slaveholders, but many of them gave shelter to Black maroons. They some intermarried, as you know. You have evidence in Minnesota itself of, you know, Blacks who intermarried with Native people, and, you know, were able to sort of be border crossers and border bridges to that. So I think, as you know, King told us once, we are all embroiled in webs of mutuality. And I don't think that any reparations discussion, be it Asian, Black, can honestly take place without us supporting the Indigenous struggle for reparations, because without them, there would be no land. You know, Black Americans who are, you know, first generation after enslaved people came here, this is the only land we know, right? And so we have to support the people whose land it is that we stand on, that many of our institutions stand on, we have to support their struggle and their right to reclaim as much of it as they possibly can. So if we have the means, whether it's financial, political, whether it's in terms of writing activism, political activism, we have to support them in their cause as well, because it is not an either or proposition. All of us cannot be, if one of us is not free, then all of us cannot be free. And I think we have to go with that kind of a foresight moving into the future. Absolutely. So I think we have to say, if we're successful, then we have to then turn our attention, to helping and supporting the indigenous struggle for reparations as well. Because if they receive what they are entitled to, which is really the land and access to natural resources, it will transform this country, because their belief system is about protecting nature and not about desecrating it. Their belief system, is a communal belief system. And the more that can be infused, and people don't understand that actually the Declaration of Independence, if you look at it, is actually connected to or stolen from the Iroquois.
Right, Federation.
The Federation,
Right.
Iroquois Federation. We keep appropriating without getting credit. So all these things that we glorify about American democracy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and this sense that we're like, this sense of a national collective, we stole. We stole from indigenous people. So the very platform on which this country is founded owes its origins to indigenous people. The land owes its origins that people possess, its origins to indigenous people. So we have to support them. That's just unquestionable.
I try to think, Dr. Irma, about the extension of the logical conclusion of the forward movement towards reconciliation. And right now, we generally talk about reparations in the context of the United States, but the problem is the challenge or the problem that reparations addresses was not solely a United States problem. It's a problem that really reflected life in all of the Americas, just like what you said, the theft of indigenous land, skill, property, and life, the imposition of enslavement on Africans, and maybe indentured status on Europeans. All of that, it seems to me, has to be part of the grand examination and reconsideration, and reparations, I think, will lead us towards a bigger conversation that is more global. What is that practical, or what do you think about that?
Well, I would say that in any kind of situation where you're struggling for rights, you have to, what does it say? Start local and think globally. Go local, so that
Local,
eventually, you start in your own backyard and you try and get that in shape, and then you expand out to see how you can help your neighbors. It is that sense, and I think this is something about human survival, is that we have been taught. I mean, I think about it, it's captured in the instructions that you're given when you're in an airline, when you're on an airplane. It says, if the oxygen fails, then put your mask on first, self-survival, and then help other people. So I think we're engaged in a struggle where if we can make any inroads in reparations, it lays the foundation for us then to help our neighbors, to help other communities, whether that community is national in this country, or whether it is, actually global, in that sense. And, there are indigenous people all over the world. And we have to understand that as we look at China has indigenous people that it has been, also not so kind to. Other parts of Latin America, Guatemala, which is next to Belize, where I did my field work, is notorious for actually committing ethnocide to try and wipe out the indigenous population. So we have to understand that even as we focus on what is due us, that what we're even asking for is really predicated on the wealth and land and things that was stolen from indigenous people before we got here. They were the test subjects for how to subjugate us. And so we do owe them, in that sense, support and gratitude that whatever we're given back in terms of land was originally their land to begin with.
You're going to be heading down to Brazil shortly.
Yay!
Talk about what's going to be going on there. We're going to be doing some broadcasting from there. One thing
Yes.
is
Yes.
that we'll have some live streams with you and our colleague Yogi Senna. But talk about what you're planning to do in Brazil.
So I'm going to be accompanied as Mara Hudoni Davis, who you know is one of your columnists. People have seen her piece on Capoeira in 7 languages now. And she is leading a team of a group of Black women on both a cultural and spiritual journey. As Mara herself, who's Afro-Palestinian, spent time in Brazil. She speaks Portuguese. She's been studying capoeira since she was a little girl. And so she wants us to sort of connect to what it is that Brazil represents. What most people don't know is that the largest population of African descended people outside of the continent of Africa was in Brazil. That is where the majority of people were enslaved. So it is a vast country with a vast population over at least 60 to 70% have some kind of African ancestry in them, undeniably. No matter what they look like, that's what the data says, is that, people don't understand. The United States is the only country in which, under colonialism, there was a white majority. Every place else where people were colonized, it was a majority of either enslaved and indigenous people, right? Or indigenous Africans, because people forget that in South Africa, indigenous people were actually enslaved in their own land, right? So we actually have more connection, as you know, from one of your guests that you've had, Elizabeth, that we have more in common actually with the coloreds of South Africa, who were descendants of enslaved people, than we do with the native-born sort of Black African stuff, So we have to really begin to parcel out the history and really analyze it instead of this global kind of euphoria that we have. We have to look at the fact that Africa is not a country; it is a continent. Right. It is comprised of many different cultures, peoples that inside them have their own internal strifes and conflicts and histories. And so we have to not start homogenizing Africa, as if it were one entity and that we expect all Africans, to be together or unified. That's just not, that's not what history tells us. And we have to respect differences, even if we don't like where they lead us. And I think where we're going at this point, there is an enterprise, a deliberate attempt to erase knowledge. And so Black newspapers, my archive, the Black Feminist Archive at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the books that we write, like the books that Jim wrote, my own books, these things become critical because where are people, particularly our children, where will they get their knowledge if they're not going to be taught it in school? And this is what I think our white, whether they're allies or even not allies, don't understand, is that Black people have never expected the majority to tell our story. And while we have Black Studies programs, I saw those programs begin to erode. I'm very proud to say that my alma mater, Grinnell College, which just gave me an honorary degree, has actually resurrected we had an Afro-American Studies concentration that was created by the students, not the faculty, but the students in the 1970s. And when I returned in 1991-92, it was eliminated, even though we wrote a proposal calling for it to continue to be supported. They've now reestablished a department, not a program, but a department of Black and Diaspora Studies and an endowed chair. And I'm happy to say that at my 50th reunion, my class made significant financial contributions to that endowed chair. as well as the library, making sure that they had diverse books. They say the librarian is beside herself. She has $50,000 to create, to begin to collect books around diversity and BIPOC cultural ideas and things. So, even at a moment where there is erasure, there are institutions and people and organizations that are committed to really practicing the fundamental democratic principles that this is a country for all of us, not just some of us.
What about the recent Supreme Court decision regarding North Carolina and Harvard? How do you see that impacting what's going to happen for access to higher education for Black people in particular?
Well,
do you see that as part of the strategy of erasure?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, Trump was very deliberate in who he put on the Supreme Court because their job was not to actually administer objective and impartial decisions, but in fact to carry forth his agenda. So he institutionalized his belief system by appointing them so he doesn't have to be here for things to happen. What are the impacts? First, I am waiting for my white feminist and white women colleagues and scholars and people who consider themselves to be woke, whatever that means, to come forth, because the greatest beneficiary, contrary to popular belief, of affirmative action was white women.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them are now in gatekeeping positions, and they serve as gatekeepers. So that's number one. I'm waiting for them to step up to the plate and to actually defend and come out and support the restoration of affirmative action. But people forget,
do you think they will? Is it going to happen? It reminds me, now you know who this is. I think either, it wasn't Maya Angelou, might have been Gwendolyn Brooks, or could have been one of the great writers. I can't remember which one. She was being interviewed with, I think, Bill Moyer, and he asked her about, her white friends, and she said, "What white friends?" And her story was, her experience was that in her relationships, it wasn't a question of whether a person who was nominally her friend would betray her, whether a white person would betray her trust, but it's a question of when, under what circumstance. So that's the reason I asked the question. Even those who benefited from the pioneering work we did in challenging and changing and opening up the more humane access, will they betray us? And is it a question of whether they will, or a question of when they will?
Well, I think similar to Black people not being homogeneous and all of one mindset, the same is true of white people. People forget the civil rights movement was an interracial movement. It was an interracial social justice movement. And there are white people who put their lives on the line and lost their lives and lost their livelihood for supporting, our struggle for civil rights and the right to vote. So there is evidence, proof, concrete, of people who have always, white people who have always aligned themselves with social justice. We see that if you go to South Africa and Cape Town, there is, in the Slavery Museum, they've made what was once the slave market into a museum to tell the story, of slavery. And one of the exhibits is an exhibit of a couple who were considered communists, but who gave their lives in support of the anti-apartheid struggle. So there is always evidence of individuals. And I think the question becomes, for many people will say, well, I didn't do anything. And they don't understand that not taking action is in fact an action. And so that if you choose to say nothing, do nothing, when you see something, right? What we're asking people to do after 9/11, see something, say something, do something. If you do nothing, then you are as complicit as the person who is actually taking the action. And so the question becomes, I think I've seen people who have put their lives on the line, to help other communities, cultural groups, advance their causes. I've seen people who've used their privilege to pave the way and then get out of the way so that the leadership of those things can be, in fact, the people for whom they're intended. But as always, we have people who have been conditioned and socialized to believe that somehow their whiteness entitles them to unearned privilege. And people don't like to give up privilege. I mean, that was one of the things Darren Walker, who is the president of the Ford Foundation, wrote a piece about it. Well, 23 years before he published that piece, I also said the same thing in talks that I was giving across the state of Iowa, which is that it is only when white people are willing to give up some of their privilege, relinquish some of their power, that we can then talk about having justice for all. And so that is really the question. Are people ready to do that? And it doesn't seem that we're at that moment at this time.
And will we ever be there? And the question from Frederick Douglass then becomes not a question of them giving up, but a question of the struggle. And the struggle has to be something that we have ownership, equity, provide direction for, and that our struggle for our own freedom is in fact a struggle for humanity's freedom. And so can we depend on them wanting to give up or being willing to give up, or is it a question of that being a consequence of the ongoing struggle or some iteration of it? Struggle might not be the right word, but it might very well be.
I think the challenge to power and to the status quo, there will always be a few individuals who are willing to give up and to support, whether they're in the positions that enable them to make critical decisions remains to be seen. But I think that we will always find some good allies, and then we will also find those people who will do nothing or who want to wait until the train is moving before they jump on board. And if it's moving in the right direction, they're with us.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing for Black people. We are not a homogeneous, collective of people. We come from many different social stratas, education. We now have age differences. We have geographical differences. I'm living in Mobile, Alabama now, and the experiences and what people do and how they manage things in Mobile is very different from, North Carolina or Raleigh, which is the capital of the state. And so I think, and what I see in countries like Belize, which was at one point predominantly, a Black country, a lot of people have immigrated. I mean, we have to look at, let's say, the whole immigration question. People say, oh, that's too many people. But all of us came from somewhere else except the indigenous people.
Right.
So how are we now in a position to say, no, you can't come? Because the people who are putting those laws in place, had they not, their ancestors not been permitted to come, they wouldn't be here, right? They wouldn't be in the positions of privilege and power that they have. And it was because their ancestors were able to make that immigration journey. So one, it's complicated, okay? There is no one single answer. We are not, I don't engage in crystal ball looking. I think we can do the best we can to project and aspire, create aspirations for the future, but I don't know if we can predict the future. But I think that if there is not strong alliance, in many respects, I say that the struggle today is actually a white people's struggle. The question is, do they want their children to grow up racially stupid? I mean, that's really the question, because the world looks more like us than it does like them, okay? Increasingly, people of color are growing and dominating. And so do you want to keep your white children in a bubble where they don't have exposure, experience, knowledge of, differences and diversity? And then when they reach out into the world, their explanation is, well, I didn't know. Well, that's no longer a viable explanation for anyone at this moment in time.
My guest yesterday talked about diversity as a humanity's superpower. And I think that's a good way of framing that. You mentioned earlier, and I want you to go more into it, this note that throughout Central and South America, African or people of color were the majority, and that North America was unique in that whites were always the majority of the population versus the enslaved populations. Describe that some more, and what difference did it make? How did communities and cultures, societies evolve with the dynamic of numbers that you described?
So most, in those societies where people of African descent were the primary labor, first it started with indigenous labor, and the diseases just decimated them. Many of these plantations were in very hot tropical countries, right? Where if you had water waves, you had mosquitoes. Well, we came with a genetic what do you call it? Immunization against malaria. We carry the sickle cell trait, some of us, right? And if that trait is homogeneous, you get sickle cell, and usually those people died out. And if it was heterozygous, meaning that you had one of each, right? Then you could survive and you were resistant to malaria. Well, in these countries, when the colonizers went, they found it to be inhospitable, right? Because of the climate, the heat, the humidity. So many didn't stay there for long periods of time. And the few that did began to marry. Cuba is a good example. They began to marry, with either indigenous or Black women. And so you now get this mulatto or mestizo population. Belize is a good example. While it was considered a British colony, only 8% of Belize's population is white. 8%. Of this population is white. And most of those are German-speaking Mennonites, probably today a few more American expatriates, but it's a very small percent. So so when you talk about the culture there, you have multiple ethnic groups. You have Maya, which are not, just homogeneous. You have Mopin Maya, you have Quechua Maya, you have Yucatero Maya. Okay, so when we say Maya, we talk about them as if they're all the one, and they're not. You then have Creole, who are people like us of African ancestry mixed with either West Indian, white, indigenous. You have the Garifuna or the Garifuna, and they are mixed with Amerindian, Indian, indigenous, and African. You have East Indian. You had, after slavery ended, they brought in laborers from East India, from India. And those people have been there since the 1800s, right? And they're very different from the more newer wave of East Indians who have come in. You also have people who are Lebanese, Syria-Lebanese descent. You have Chinese, and the Chinese who've been there since like the early 1900s are very different from the Chinese who've come in recently from Taiwan. So this kind of fusion of culture and stuff was always in an instant where you had a white minority, right? And because, say, Belize, as a good example, was not a plantation culture, it was timber extraction. So people would go in the woods, they were able to have machetes, they were able to have their own land and grow crops, and so we have to look at the fact that some of us have grown up our history is under different kinds of colonial structures. The United States is the only colonial power in which the majority of the population was white. That's number one. Number two, it is the only colonial power that engaged in the trafficking and human trafficking. The United States is the only country in which the selling of slaves became a commodity, where they would force women and men to breed as if they were cattle in order to reproduce more slaves. That didn't happen in other places. Okay, they bought slaves in, they labored, they were laborers, they may have had children, but they were not a commodity in the sense that the majority of wealth of some of these plantations came from the reproduction of slaves and the buying and selling of slaves. So that gives a very different spin. You also have to understand that every colonial power was different. The French were assimilationists. If you learned French and began to take on French culture, you were sort of more accepted, right? The Dutch were actually like the British and, who are the origins of us. They were not assimilationists. They wanted to keep things separately. The Spanish created this notion of purity of blood because the Spaniards who were in Cuba, for example, they were starting to mix with the indigenous and the Black slaves. And the Catholic Church said, well, if you're going to be having children with these women, you have to marry them. So they create this notion of limpieza de raza, purity of blood, so that if you were a Spaniard and you had children, that child you could not marry the indigenous or Black woman if anyone in your family in Spain objected, they could be your fifth cousin 3 times removed. But if you had family who objected, you could not marry. If, however, you were an orphan, a white man who was an orphan, then you could marry, right? Someone who was not of your same quote unquote racial background. It gets very complicated, you know, but those were the things. In Cuba, they recorded births in the white book and the black book. You could look like me, but if my birth was recorded in the white book, I was white. And someone could have blonde hair, blue eyes, and if their birth was recorded in the black book, they were black, and the two could not marry, right? So it gets very, very complicated. And when the United States invaded Cuba, they didn't know what to do because we're so used to looking at phenotype and making assumptions. Cuba was like, and then they had Chinese Cubans too. So they were like very confused by what is going on. So I think one is that the histories of many countries in the Americas are much more complicated. There are people of African descent all across Latin America. Even Argentina, which most people see as a white country, right, had African slaves. So somewhere in somebody's DNA, there is African ancestry. And I think that's what we have to begin to teach our children, that the history is not one, our history is not the center of the universe, and that we need to learn more about the different countries, cultures, the different struggles, because there have always been struggles against slavery and injustice.
Irma, this is a wonderful conversation. Greg, classic Dr. Irma form, full of information. Thank you. One last item that I want to just mention. There's a report, well, two. One, there's a report, I think in news today or yesterday that I read, that the Catholic Church is taken to task for its maintaining and selling of slaves. And the article, I think today or yesterday, talked specifically about one of the universities in New York where, in order for it to continue, it had to sell human beings.
Well, and, George Washington University, and one of my former students, who is an alumni of Grinnell College, is in a book because he works at GW and discovered that one of his ancestors was actually sold by them in order for that institution that he now works at to exist. So there are a number of universities. It started with Ruth Simmons and Brown.
That's the story right there. Yeah.
Right, that are going around. They formed a kind of a coalition now of these institutions that sold slaves, and sort of what do we do now as reparations, right? And so that is going to be an ongoing conversation. But many institutions, particularly the private ones, that's how they manage to survive.
The last piece, a note for about a minute here, is that the Minneapolis police chief is saying he didn't know anything about the history of Tyler Timberlake, who had been charged but acquitted of hitting and using a stun gun on an unarmed black man when he was an officer in a Virginia police department. And this incident happened just after George Floyd's murder here in Minneapolis in 2020. And so the question is there enough safeguard, enough oversight to ensure bad cops just don't circulate from department to department? What do you think?
I think this is a crisis of leadership. When you are president, which I've been president of the university, whether you're an associate VP, I've been an associate VP at the University of Minnesota, if something happens, the buck stops with you. This is a failure of leadership where either people intentionally kept his from him, because we know that there is this kind of brotherhood under the blue, and it doesn't matter what your skin looks like once you put on that blue uniform. So it could very well be, but then that means that he has a leadership issue, because if people kept that information from him and it was intentional, then that says that who can he trust? And so it's a failure on him to see. He's got to dig deep and find out where it came, because somebody knew that. This is not information. It was in the news, right? Somebody knew it and they failed to let him know. So he's got a leadership crisis on his hands.
Irma, thank you so much. We're out of time. And good show Thursday. Thank you for sitting in for me on Thursday.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm Al
care.
McFarlane. This is The Conversation. My thanks to Dr. Irma McLaren. And make sure you check her out online on Thursday. She'll be hosting the program. In the meantime, thank you. We'll see you next time.